I first met Vivienne in a group called CAPER, and Ian was involved as well, and this was about curriculum, assessment, pedagogy. And this is probably more than 10 years ago. It was fantastic to hear the different experiences of the group. We then, some of us got together to edit the curriculum journal. Anyway, our interests overlap in many ways. But as you'll hear, as I hand over the baton of the presidency to Vivienne, that she has a really insightful grasp of who are we? Thank you for that. How did we get here? And perhaps even more important, where are we going? So, Vivienne, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for everybody that's made this possible. I'm going to actually read my address because otherwise, well, I might get lost in what I'm going to say, and I will definitely take far too long, and I'm sure you wouldn't want that to happen. So it's a privilege of the incoming president to address the membership at conference, and each of my 36 predecessors have offered insight into their current interests, their reflections on trends over time, and their concerns regarding the future of educational research. As we meet together again as a community here in Liverpool in 2022, I would like to use this opportunity to reflect on the three questions. Who are we? How did we get here? Where are we going? In some respects, answers to these questions are relatively straightforward. BERA is a learned society, established in 1974, and as a charity, our purpose is to encourage the pursuit of educational research and its application for both the improvement of educational practice and the public benefit. We have a 5-year strategic plan of priority activities to support educational research by building capacity, advancing quality, and promoting engagement. And we developed this in consultation with you, our membership. And as we've heard earlier today, our membership is growing and currently stands at over 2,700 members. So far, so good. But does this tell us all we need to know? What does it mean to belong to a learned society for educational research today? What is the role of education in a democratic society? As I will argue in this address for the importance of recognising how context and experience influences the transaction of knowledge for the public benefit within and beyond the BERA community, it seems only fair to begin with a snapshot of who I am and how I got here. My own interest is in the role of the university in initial and continuing professional education. It is an interest triggered by my career as a researcher in politics, who later qualified as a secondary school teacher and taught for 12 years before returning to the higher education sector as a teacher educator. Making the transition from doctoral student to lecturer is precarious, as many people in this room know. And my specialism, the intersection of religion and politics in the development of nationalism in early 20th century Bengal, was not commensurate with access to secure employment in the recession-hit universities of the 1980s. Who'd have thought? After qualifying as a teacher, I tried to continue my research by working part-time in an inner-city secondary school and part-time as a university tutor in Indian religions. But this, unsurprisingly, proved to be unsustainable. So for 12 years, I was a full-time teacher until finding my way back into academia as a teacher educator and educational researcher. What I learned as I made these transitions from a university environment into schools and back again caused me to question the simple binaries of theory and practice I often found in accounts of the relationship between research and teaching. The focus of my first major funded research project was on the creation and translation of knowledge in school-university partnerships. And this led me to consider how context and experience, different professional cultures, shapes learning, and to value the importance of dialogue in finding common ground. The sociologist Andrew Abbott characterises the interaction of academia and the professions as a dynamic system of linked ecologies, where the legitimacy of different forms of knowledge is disputed, and gaining public recognition of expertise is crucial to establishing jurisdiction. It is in navigating these tensions that opportunities arise to challenge existing settlements and disrupt hierarchies of knowledge to form new alliances. I'm curious to know what the perspective of linked ecologies, of academia and the professions, in which the public have a key role to play, can contribute to the charting of the future course for BERA. So, who are we? The vitality of BERA depends on you, its members, who attend our annual conference, publish in our journals, edit special issues of Research Intelligence, post on the blog, join special interest groups and networks, serve on committees and on BERA Council. In recent years, we have seen a steady increase in membership to reach the highest figure ever, and this includes colleagues from universities, colleges, schools and local government across the 4 nations of the United Kingdom, as well as independent researchers and international members. Expansion of our membership enables us to increase the number of grant opportunities, as Dominic was outlining earlier today. We can offer BERA members, including targeted support for early career researchers. There is much to celebrate here, but also challenges in making sure that we continue to build capacity by understanding how to encourage those who join us to feel able to participate fully. In 1974, the inaugural president, John Nisbet, spoke of the founding of BERA as marking the recognition of educational research as an independent discipline with its own body of knowledge and distinct methods. At the same time, he also warned of the risk of specialisms, creating internal divisions, and encouraged members to mitigate this by remembering to look outwards and to the future, as, in the long run, the real influence of educational research is through its effect on the attitudes of those who teach. Whilst the sentiment of educational research as essentially an applied social science, implied by Nisbet, still pertains today, defining those who teach requires careful attention if we are to avoid lapsing into divisions between research and teaching, when it is increasingly the case that researchers teach and teachers research. The governance structures and the terms and conditions of employment across all sectors of education are not the same now as they were in 1974, and there is a widening divergence across the 4 jurisdictions of the United Kingdom. We are all, of course, well aware of these changes, but do we know enough about how they position our members, individually and collectively, in relation to research, policy and practice, and how this impacts on BERA's capability as a learned society to be a forum for knowledge exchange and dissemination? Another president, Donald McIntyre, in 1996, drew attention to the problem of BERA attempting to conduct its activities with limited or inadequate information about the aspirations and needs of its members. He pointed out that one of the most important things to be said in discussing educational researchers in Britain is that I don't think we know much about ourselves. The State of the Discipline project, instigated by my predecessor Dominic Wise, responds to this need to address the issue by examining the current situation of those members of the BERA community working in higher education institutions. The first phase of the project was a review of the literature to ascertain the type, kind and quality of published research evidence and identify the main themes relevant to understanding the structures and processes that influence research activities in the UK. One of the recommendations from this phase was the need to listen to the voices of all stakeholders to facilitate more effective communication between those responsible for particular structures and processes and those whose professional lives are affected by them. The second phase of the project has produced a report focusing on equality, diversity and inclusion, comparing existing data on education faculty staff with other disciplines in higher education, and a survey of education researchers' perceptions of their work and identities in relation to education research in universities in the UK. There will be an opportunity to learn more from sessions at this conference and from subsequent events planned to share the findings from this second phase and consider their implications as Dominic continues to lead the project in his role as Vice President. The aspect I want to mention here is the report focusing on equality, diversity and inclusion. It's revealing about conditions of employment in universities, in particular the lack of diversity, the large proportion of part-time staff, the shorter career duration of those females who do progress to professor level, and the precarious situation of new starters, all within the wider context of a lower rate of growth as compared with other academic disciplines overall. In short, there is cause for concern regarding the pipeline into employment in a university. The continued uncertainty following the recent spate of educational reforms regarding the involvement of education departments in the initial and continuing professional education of teachers can only exacerbate the situation. Knowing more about the circumstances of colleagues employed, or perhaps more importantly, not being employed, as educational researchers in universities is a priority. But as the constitution of our membership indicates, will not give a complete picture. We also need to take account of the wider context of the relationship between research, education, and the professions if we are to understand the opportunities for and constraints on the sphere of influence for educational research. I want to move on now to an overview of how we got here. You will be relieved to hear that I'm not going to attempt to present a comprehensive account of the history of BERA. We have ambitions to map our development as a learned society as part of our 50th anniversary celebrations in 2024. In this address, I will focus on one strand in BERA's development, the one that interests me most, the encounter of research with the professions. My intention is to explore the explanatory power of Abbott's concept of linked ecologies, in which academia and the professions are engaged, sometimes together and sometimes in competition, in establishing claims for jurisdiction over occupations and areas of social activity, and where the public is the final arbitrator. Given the time constraints, neither will I attempt to cover all 36 previous presidential addresses, but will focus on two sharing the same title, Profession of Educational Research, to indicate tropes in thinking about research and the professions before drawing on insights from my own experience of the School-Based Research Consortia initiative. This was a 3-year project consisting of 4 regional consortia in England, composed of a university, local authority, and 6 schools, funded by the Teacher Training Agency, some people in the room might remember them, and the Centre for British Teachers. It was an experimental laboratory for policy to explore how teachers could play a more active role in the conception, implementation, evaluation, and dissemination of research. This will then be set in the wider context of school-university partnerships and the contribution of what has been termed close to practice research to formulating a response to the injunction of another former president, Lawrence Stenhouse, to avoid simplified binaries and find approaches to research which produce theory which is of use both to practitioners of education and to practitioners of educational research, and which enables both to act in the light of systematic intelligence. The stimulus for the theme of the presidential addresses on the profession of educational research was in both instances the need for BERA to support its members in an increasingly hostile climate of public criticism. Caroline Gipps in 1992 sets out a professional agenda for BERA members who were facing a discourse of derision after providing alternative interpretations of the results of the then recently introduced standardised testing, SATs, in primary schools, which were being used to construct a narrative of underachieving pupils, schools and local education authorities based on the publication of league tables. On one occasion, the work of eminent educational researchers analysing the data was publicly dismissed as fiddling the figures. The professional agenda would support the forming of an alliance with everyone engaged in education to form a polity based on shared principles of equity, with the capacity to develop a collegial approach to the interpretation of evidence from research. Paramount for Gipps is the role of BERA in providing a network of support for members to mitigate the effect of the micropolitics of everyday life within institutions. In this way, the values of professionalism can be invoked to counteract the influence of neoliberal constructs of market forces, competition, and individual choice as the sole arbiter of quality in education. Gipps' rationale for such an alliance draws upon the work of Dewey in demonstrating the importance of forming a diverse community able to tolerate the ambiguity of problematic situations long enough to engage in inquiry and reach agreement on a course of action. It is this interplay of different forms of knowledge from research and from experience that is fundamental to the exercise of professional judgment and essential to democracy. In 1996, David Hargreaves gave his controversial public lecture advocating the diversion of research funding from universities to agencies committed to evidence-based research in full partnership with teachers. According to Hargreaves, educational research was fatally flawed by a division between its producers, university-based educational researchers, and the users, teachers in schools. And he compared this to other professions, such as medicine, where clinicians were both researchers and users. And in his analysis, there was poor quality and irrelevance in educational research because of this lack of close coupling of producers and users. McIntyre took up the challenge in his presidential address, where he responds in part to Hargreaves, where he recognises the importance of educational research being professional as opposed to amateur. He identifies the determinants of professionalism as the command of a body of specialist knowledge, demonstration of expertise, and a collective focus on enabling the realisation of educational values. Whilst both educational researchers and teachers should be expected to be professional, McIntyre was less certain about obscuring the distinction between the profession of teaching and the profession of research. He thought that obscuring this distinction might actually undermine the professionalism of both teachers and researchers. He wondered whether there were more differences and similarities between the work and therefore the specialist knowledge and expertise of each profession. He doubted whether conflating producers and users, as Hargreaves appears to suggest, is in the best interest of either profession. The expectation that teachers should take on the rigours of doing research adds another burden to an already demanding occupation. McIntyre encourages BERA to reflect more deeply on the concept of a profession of educational research, what it can and should mean for partnership between teachers and researchers. In particular, how to reconcile endorsement of the foundational principles of pluralism and openness with achieving clarity in determining aspirations and commitments. He concludes in agreement with Gibbs that this requires dialogue with everyone who shares responsibility for quality in education. Although I have only focused on the two instances where the presidents took the interaction of educational research and the professions as the main theme, the concerns they raise can be traced in previous and subsequent addresses. The endorsement of BERA as an inclusive community, united in its mission to support educational research by building capacity, advancing quality, and promoting engagement, is freighted with anxieties regarding perceptions of its relevance. Questioning of the feasibility of balancing breadth of scope with depth to secure a distinct and robust body of knowledge recognised by other academic disciplines recurs. When considering academic and professional knowledge cultures, there is a tendency, often unintentionally, of resiling to a theory versus practice binary, and a preoccupation with the effect of government policy on schooling that sometimes limits possibilities of considering other professions and other professional educators. Although more recently the question of knowledge transfer and the importance of considering time and place as contexts for shaping knowledge production and reception have received more attention. The School-Based Research Consortia initiative was launched in 1997, 1 year after Hargreaves' controversial public lecture. My experience of being part of one of the 4 regional consortia, the North East School-Based Research Consortium, was an early opportunity to gain insight into the opportunities and challenges the proposition of the educational research professional might offer. Working with teachers investigating learning in their classrooms across the regions, with Anne Edwards and the Leeds Consortium, John Elliott and the Norwich Consortium, and Olwyn McNamara and the Leeds Consortium, and the Manchester Consortium, we began to develop a common understanding of the importance of the dynamic between engaging in research and engaging with research in the creation of professional knowledge. Whilst engaging in research supports closer investigation of problematic situations in the context of teachers' own classroom, this extends interest in finding out more by engaging with research. The fundamental principle being that teachers and researchers share an interest in understanding a problematic situation to which each can bring their specialist knowledge and expertise. The School-Based Research Consortia supported the formation of a community of inquiry and was the leveller of any hierarchy of knowledge, as the mutual desire to find solutions promotes authentic, collaborative effort. I would argue that together we found the means to allay the concerns expressed by McIntyre on the risk of blurring and so diluting our respective professional identities by, as the work of Cochrane Smith and Lytle in the US has also demonstrated, working the dialectic of research and practice. It would be misleading to suggest that working in the School-Based Research Consortia did not present difficulties. We were a diverse community and did not always agree. The residential meetings, when all 4 consortia came together, could be sites of contention as well as opportunities to share perspectives. Tensions can arise around the reconciling of what is learned from close study of specific contexts, what is termed idiographic research, and what has more general resonance, between what participants themselves find convincing and what they think will convince others. but we found that the framework as a community of inquiry was generative in facilitating the contribution of such dilemmas to further debate on the nature of evidence itself. Whilst reconfiguring structures and relationships within and between academia and the professions is challenging, the evidence of the school-based research consortia demonstrated that in the case of faculties of education and teachers in schools, it is possible and everyone can benefit. As the external evaluation of the initiative concluded, it amounts to nothing short of the reprofessionalisation of teaching as evidence-informed. Based on this alone, there would appear to be promise in the sponsorship of teacher-university networks. It's never reappeared in policy, we all note, after that statement. However, the aftermath of the school-based research consortia indicates the factors, many already present at its foundation, that began to reduce the possibility of building on what we had learnt from the initiative. Academics were increasingly subject to accountability structures, restricting the scope for activity with open-ended outcomes that building such long-term relationships requires, especially as this was often unfunded. University-based teacher educators, in many respects natural mediators between research and the profession, were particularly vulnerable as the increased evolution of their role to in-school provision impacted on the funding and staffing of faculties of education. For teachers, the promotion of research and evidence-informed profession underpinning the school-based research consortia was subsumed under the construal of evidence as data on performance in government-mandated tests. The impact of these changes on the delicately balanced supporting structure that made the school-based research consortia possible illustrates how the intersection of policy agendas can result in collateral damage. Sometimes this is noticed, sometimes not, and certainly the consequences not always understood. Partnerships promoting closer interaction between research and the professions disrupt existing structures. And although much has been written about the potential of brokers and boundary crossers, including by me, to effect change, liminality can quickly become precarity in the midst of competing claims for jurisdiction. Abbott comments on this characteristic of the linked ecologies of academia and the professions, in which competition is as much a feature as mutual coexistence, and takeovers can be as likely as alliances in the imperative to establish jurisdictions. Fortunately, a stubborn cohort of educational researchers and teachers, representing a spectrum of theoretical and methodological positions, have, despite the difficulties, wrestled with the challenge of negotiating productive school-university partnerships before and long after policymakers ended the school-based research consortia experiment. Christopher Day, with Gu, Townsend and Holdridge, have recently analysed the evidence for school-university partnerships internationally and concluded that, although challenging as social enterprises in their requirement for commitment to participation in a hermeneutic dialogue, their capacity to build knowledge through relationship, openness to learning, and provision of space for uncertainty are valuable assets. Graham Hanscom, in his work on the ecosystem of schools, professional learning and research engagement, also lends support to the efficacy of building school-university partnership. In short, ways of working in productive research partnerships continue to be developed. Time prevents me from doing more than to draw attention to some examples of current activities, and I apologise to those I know I will offend by not acknowledging their work here. Cambridge University has sustained SUPER, the School-University Partnership for Educational Research, initially founded by McIntyre as a collaborative research partnership. They've sustained that throughout shifts in policy and models of teacher education developed by Oxford University and the University of Glasgow, both interestingly drawing upon insights from medical education, enable research-rich partnerships between teachers and teacher educators to thrive. Bristol University, building on the most recent philosophical analysis of the nature of teachers' knowledge by Winch, Ansea and Orchard, has recently taken up the challenge of creating contexts for the exchange of perspectives on experience between teachers, researchers and teacher educators in the Shared Space Initiative. The Centre for Research in Professional Learning at the University of Exeter, which I co-direct with Karen Mattick, a Professor of Medical Education, recently completed a project on teachers' engagement with research that confirmed the importance of providing hospitable spaces for collaboration so that perspectives can be shared frankly and the different pressures exerted by institutional cultures negotiated. Despite duration of interest in school-university partnerships as one of the ways in which research and practice can be more closely aligned to afford mutual benefit, building a cumulative body of knowledge about their processes and outcomes is difficult. One of the barriers to building such a body of knowledge is a confusing proliferation of different terminology that can be misleading, as the same term is often used when the aims and purposes are very different, and vice versa. McLaughlin and Black attempted to address this problem by developing a typology of school-university partnerships, and there is scope for more work to update this analysis as a useful tool for future researchers. Another barrier is building a robust research base. Another barrier to building a robust research base is confusion as to the nature of the knowledge that is produced, and therefore how it can be codified or evaluated. The Close to Practice Research project was commissioned by BERA to build on the work already begun in a framework of assessing quality in applied and practice-based educational research in response to the observations of the 2014 REF panel report. Members of this team continue to develop our understanding of the characteristics and criteria for evaluating quality and relevance as the field continues to evolve. As was mentioned earlier today, BERA has negotiated a contract with the publisher Sage to produce a 2-volume handbook of research-informed education and practice and policy. This major 2-volume work will have chapters from leading international researchers, and we hope it will be a valuable resource for researchers in the field. I conclude this reflection on how we got here by focusing briefly on the wider context of the role of universities in the provision for professional learning and the implications for securing the jurisdiction of educational research. In answering the question, do universities have a role in the education and training of teachers, Bob Moon, in his international comparison of provision, concludes that for there not to be a role for the university would be to the detriment not only of teachers' professionalism, but also to the important task of universities themselves in building strong stakeholder communities and frameworks. And I quote, "Where this has not happened, other stakeholders, governments, businesses are stepping in, sometimes shoving out the university. I think this is unfortunate. Teaching is an intellectual and professional task, and deep connection with the university ought to be at its core." The University's Council for the Education of Teachers, USET, initiated a study to develop a better understanding of the contribution made by teacher educators in faculties of education to the strategic aims of their institutions. The intention of the study is to direct attention towards the position of university-based teacher educators as members of academic staff and their expertise in core institutional activities, including supporting professional and practitioner learning more widely, reflective practice, developing conducive learning environments and cultures, pedagogic curriculum development and assessment. The capacity of teacher educators to use their knowledge and skills to support community engagement, partnerships, widening participation, access and employability is also highlighted. but concerns are raised in their preliminary report that the positioning of faculties of education within university structures may be masking knowledge, skills and expertise that could be valuably deployed within the sector. Jurisdiction also comes into play here in the sense of the different political settlements in the devolved nations of the increasingly disunited kingdom, which provide a laboratory for the observation of the interaction of global trends, national contexts and local circumstances in what has been termed home international studies. Hume and Ian Mentor, in their report of a teaching and learning research programme funded scoping study comparing provision for initial teacher education and early professional development in post-devolution UK, explored the extent to which learning to teach can be characterised as a technical or an ethical process. They found that England afforded the least scope for agency, as sustained emphasis on a reductive view of practice and the promotion of multiple routes into teaching, which marginalised universities and risked the pedagogical de-skilling of the profession. Diversion across the four nations of the UK since this scoping study has in many respects accelerated in the intervening years. BERA, in partnership with the Royal Society for the Encouragement of Arts, Manufacture and Commerce, RSA, commissioned another inquiry on the role of research in teacher education, which was mentioned just before. The inquiry concluded that while the idea of teaching as a research-based profession is increasingly evident in Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales, it seems that England, at least in respect of the political rhetoric, recent reforms and explicit definitions, is fixed on a contrastingly divergent trajectory towards the idea of teaching as a craft-based occupation with a concomitant emphasis on a return to the practical. The proactive approach taken in the USET initiative to making the case for the importance of teacher education for the mission of the contemporary university is, I believe, a fruitful course of action. Whilst focusing on the case of teacher education does not offer full illumination of the issues affecting the contemporary university, it can highlight how a space within existing structures challenges binaries to create sufficient tension to offer new possibilities. It will be important to widen the perspective further, to consider professional education as a provocation and disruptor of assumptions regarding the relationship between the university and the professions. Forging alliances with academic colleagues also engaged in professional education, in law, health and engineering, for example, will extend and strengthen the case. It will also be necessary to engage with the changing role of administrators and the implications of the emergence of hybrid professionalism within our universities. The debate has a wider resonance, not simply with other forms of professional education, but also for the contribution of the university in contemporary society. How the question of whether teacher education should continue to have a place within the university is addressed is an indication of the position taken on the nature of teaching as a profession and the extent to which teachers are to be trained as providers of technical service or educated to become agents of educational and social reform. However, the location of teacher education has radical potential, not just for teacher professionalism. Provision for their learning also has implications for how the purpose of research is understood and how the relation with the professions more widely is shaped. The status of a profession is dependent on establishing claims to specialist knowledge acquired through higher education, experience sustained through lifelong learning, and a commitment to a code of ethics. Integral to a professional's daily work is the requirement to draw upon evidence, to exercise judgment in determining the best course of action in complex, problematic situations. It's on this basis that they establish their authority and earn public trust. Positioned at the intersection of research, policy and practice, professionals can mediate between experts and the public. The ideal type of the professional can be represented as a public intellectual, equipped to be an advocate for democracy in their service to the community. The reality, of course, may fall short of fulfilling this potential, but does not diminish the pivotal role of professionals in the access of global trends, national contexts, and local circumstances. Recognition of multiple narratives in contemporary society may erode the idea of a single public, but has increased the need for education that can promote critical engagement. The description of public intellectuals as needing to operate within multiple tensions, including those between theory and practice, between elitism and mass appeal, and between academic specialisation and generalist inclusiveness, will resonate with academics involved in professional education, as well as the members of the professions they teach. The close association of critical pedagogy with the function of the public intellectual can be found in the writings of Dewey and Freire and in reflections on the obligations of both academics and professionals. The importance of the university-based teacher-educator is crucial in resisting restricted notions of teaching. And whilst focusing on the case of teacher-educator does not offer full illumination of the issues affecting the contemporary university, it can highlight how this space within can create sufficient tension to offer new possibilities. The situation of teacher education in higher education serves as a reminder that for Baba, the most potent binary is that of inclusion-exclusion. The debate has a wider resonance, not simply with other forms of professional education, but also, I would argue, for the contribution of the social sciences in contemporary society. We heard from David James this morning, and the full report of the educational panel of 2021 REF endorses the continued progress of educational research, as we heard, earning the wider recognition that our founding president identified in 1974. Educational research plays a vital role in supporting the many organisations, individuals and activities involved in education, providing independent analysis and insight to promote reflection, understanding, effectiveness, improvement and renewal. Encouraging as this is, the report also notes that submissions had fewer outputs co-authored with contributors from outside universities, even though there was evidence of collaborative work in impact case studies. Perhaps there is still some caution within higher education institutions in the selection of what is a strong REF output, indicating that there is still work to be done on establishing the rigour of close-to-practice research. So I conclude by looking at where are we going. What I've tried to do in that section, by following the thread of professional learning and education as a professional activity, is to build on what Nisbet said about the importance of looking outside and beyond and building alliances and coalitions. So where are we going? So what can a perspective on educational research from the point of view of provision for professional learning contribute to the charting of a future course for BERA? In the first instance, it can highlight the importance of recognising how context and experience influences the transaction of knowledge and how this can contribute to the benefit of the public. Drawing upon the work of sociologists of the professions, such as Abbott, we can gain insight into a dynamic system of linked ecologies, where the legitimacy of different forms of knowledge is disputed. And that's important. The dispute is important. And gaining public recognition of expertise is crucial to establishing jurisdiction. His analysis of the most important variables in the system as those that facilitate or constrain the forming of alliances across contexts and those that determine the various strategies of alliance, such as differences in relative size of actors in adjacent ecologies, diversity of local arrangements of members, speed of competition between ecologies, lend substance to what can otherwise seem to be a cosy but vacuous notion of community. It enables us to see that it is in navigating these tensions that opportunities arise to challenge existing settlements and disrupt hierarchies of knowledge, to form new alliances, and to recognise that contingency plays an important role. Whilst not everyone in BERA shares a research interest in professional learning, alliance with the professions to counteract reductive views of their knowledge and expertise as restricted to being skilled technicians, and support for them in emphasising the importance of the capacity to exercise professional judgment would strengthen the position of both practitioners and researchers. In the first presidential address to BERA members, John Nisbet encouraged members to remember to look outwards, and Caroline Gibbs takes up this advice in her proposal that we develop a professional agenda to form an alliance within BERA's diverse membership to mitigate the effect of the micro-politics of everyday circumstances. With his characteristic combining of analytical insight with common sense, Donald McIntyre encourages BERA to reflect more deeply on what we mean when we use concepts such as of a profession of educational research, and what this can and should mean for partnership between teachers and researchers. In particular, how to reconcile endorsement of the foundational principles of pluralism and openness with achieving clarity in determining aspirations and commitments. Mary James, another previous president, in 2011, focused on the need to be more confident and outward-looking, to embrace the tensions inherent in education as an applied discipline, and take pride in our attempts to grapple with complex problems of policy and practice. Gemma Moss and Dominic Wise both tackled the question of knowledge transfer and the importance of considering time and place as contexts for shaping knowledge production and reception in their presidential addresses, lending further momentum to the work of BERA in gaining recognition for the contribution we make to social science and ultimately to the public good. We continue to work with the Academy of Social Sciences, of which BERA was a founder member, to grow public confidence in educational research. Another former president, Jeff Whitty, reflecting on the extraordinary concatenation of circumstances for research to influence policy directly, considered whether attempting to influence public debate may be a more democratic mode of action. I conclude this presidential address with some reflections on BERA, constituted as a community of inquiry composed of diverse voices, and on the need to strengthen links externally with those who share our interest in supporting educational research. As a learned society, BERA has a commitment to knowledge exchange and dissemination, in keeping with the principle that learned societies are sites for intellectual debate independent of institutional constraints. Our primary purpose is to provide public benefit, an aspiration that is continually evolving as we, like other learned societies, adapt to changes in the environment in which we function. So far, we have shown resilience and adaptability in identifying issues affecting our community and in providing resources to inform debate and support for members. If we are to continue to be an agile and responsive association, we will not only need to continue to encourage the active participation of members, you, vital to BERA as a democratic institution, we also need to work on being a diverse, inclusive research community. The publication of our race equality policy is a start, but we still have a long way to go. Building capacity in what will probably be increasingly difficult times is a priority. And I return to the analysis of Abbott in suggesting that we cannot and should not try to do this alone, but should increase and strengthen alliances with other research associations, learned societies, and other professions. We are a community of scholars, and our individual achievements stand on the shoulders of those who have gone before us. And so I will leave the final word to Caroline Gipps, the 5th woman president of BERA, who exhorts us to hold on to a vision of what we do that is of worth, and we must not give up. Thank you.
Very good, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Vivienne. Absolutely inspiring talk. My mind is buzzing, and I want to share some of that with people I meet next door, where we're going to have a drink together. So many congratulations, President Baumfield. Thank you.